Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Board of Public Safety meeting for the City of Wildwood. Michelle, if you would call the roll.
Marshall Scott Collier.
Present.
Lynette Baker.
Present.
Dave Bertolino.
Present.
Captain James Mundell. Joe Hafer.
Present.
Denny Welker.
Present.
Okay, and Jeff Baker is absent.
Great. First item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. That would have been December 5th. The minutes have been disseminated. Does anyone have any questions or revisions? Hearing none, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes. Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
Great. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. All those opposed? The minutes are accepted. Okay, now we move on to public comment. Michelle, do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, we have Deborah Smith McCutcheon. She's a council person for Ward 5, and she wants to speak about domestic violence.
Very good, thank you.
Now, good evening. I wanted to address the domestic violence bill. I attended a workshop, and then I've done some other research, and I brought the bill forward to City Council. And the reason I asked for it to come back to the Board of Public Safety is I wanted it to have a little bit more teeth than it did. I talked to the prosecuting attorney, and then there were a lot of different people that worked with domestic violence at the seminar. So I wanted it to, I guess you all got my information. So I wanted it to address stalking a little bit more, sexual assault, domestic harassment, but the most importantly, I wanted to actually state a penalty in the ordinance. So I'd appreciate if you consider those items, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very good. I see no other items for information or old business, so we'll move straight into new business, which is consideration of bill number 2537. which I see was referred back to us from the council. Is that correct? Okay. Rick?
Yes, Mr. Marshall, I don't know the department has much to say regarding this. Ms. McCutcheon gave you a brief overview of the bill. Ms. McCutcheon had recommended this be brought to the city council, and it was done. A bill was created, I believe, by our city attorney and presented at the December 9th meeting, at which time there was discussion and a motion was made to bring it back to Board of Public Safety tonight for your review to consider the modifications. And Ms. McCutcheon has provided an email earlier with the changes that she's suggesting should be added to the bill tonight. So I think the question to you is, do you want to recommend incorporating those into the bill? And if so, that change would presumably be made, and then the bill would then be presented back to the full council for consideration in a revised manner. I do need to point out that our city attorney, John Young, did make a special trip here tonight for this topic. So it might be wise to let Mr. Young weigh in with regard to these changes, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. Sir, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, and it's nice to meet many of you for the first time. I've been working with Councilmember McCutcheon and the City Council on reviewing possible revisions to the City Code that have a particular focus on domestic violence-related crimes. Now, in the conversations, and why it's been referred here is there's some attempt or idea of gleaning similar, or basically importing similar laws either at the state level or from the county and imposing them in the city of Wildwood. And my role really in being here is just to kind of level set and make sure that everybody knows what we can do and really what the practical impacts of what you may do will be. Specifically, we prepared and we have presented, and what was specifically referred to in the bill was a domestic assault charge. So that would be the penalty. Now, if you read the ordinance language, it is very, very similar in terms of the elements of the crime to that of just assault. So why would we add domestic to that? Well, it is very specific as it applies to who the victim is, okay? Now, from the city's perspective, the city has a maximum penalty that it can impose, $1,000, 90 days in jail. And that is our general penalty provision in Chapter 100 of our city code sets forth the penalties. Now, Councilmember McCutcheon in her comment said, I want specific penalties set forth in these ordinances, and that's fine. We can do that. But lacking that, we would defer then to the general penalty provision, which is $1,000, 90 days in jail, or both. So it's possible to do both as well. Now, I will say, for jail time, for a municipal court to have jail time even on the table, they have to have the right to defense counsel. So either they need to either have their own attorney or the city needs to provide one to them, which is not something the city's in the practice of doing, of providing defense counsel. So when we talk about jail time, just know that if they come unrepresented, really the only way to put jail time on the table is if they are provided an attorney. But the other reason for the city to have an ordinance that is specific to domestic assault is in the statute for domestic assault. What we've modeled, there are 4 degrees of domestic assault. And we are at the 4th degree. That's what we've modeled after because it's in the range that we're allowed to do. A municipal court has no jurisdiction over felonies. So we cannot put in our ordinance as something that would be a felony under state law. But in that statute, in the 4th degree domestic assault statute, it says that it is a misdemeanor under state law unless there are prior convictions, including municipal ordinance violations for the same fine or for the same offense. So it is justified, appropriate, and I think a good idea to have a separate domestic assault ordinance, because if it happens a second time, it could be, the same offense happens a second or third time. I don't know the exact number without looking at the statute, but it could trigger felony penalties that the state then could enforce. And that's specific to even an ordinance violation, much less any other state violations. So in terms of the overall justice system, I think it's good for the city to have that particular penalty. Now, for other domestic type offenses, that doesn't exist. So, for example, there's been some suggestions of domestic harassment or domestic destruction of property, and St. Louis County has a lot of these. Now, for St. Louis County, again, what's the difference between harassment and domestic harassment? It's who the victim is. And oftentimes, the reason for the distinction is penalty escalator. Well, in a city who has a penalty cap, pretty small penalty cap, there's not a whole lot of room to move up in terms of penalty escalators. And since there's not a corresponding statute that would allow for felony convictions on a second or third offense, we don't have that from a practical perspective. So what we're really just talking about is creating a different crime that has the exact same elements, just different defendants. One is a general defendant, one is a specific defendant, but the penalties really don't change because it's our maximum penalty provision. Now, you could say that the penalty shall not be less than, which we don't have right now, in terms of like a monetary fine, and that would be the direction to the judge, but that's pretty rare to do. But you could do it. And again, I'm not taking a position for or against, but I want you to know what the practical impacts of anything you put forward would in fact be. Now, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has during the course of the discussion.
Great, thank you. I know I have a few questions, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues here, give them first crack if anyone has any questions.
Mr. Marshall, I would point out that Captain Mundell is with us tonight and certainly might have an opinion on some of this as well. So obviously don't forget to consider his expertise.
Oh, trust me, I won't. Well, I'll lead off here then. So if I Mr. Young, if I understood you correctly, so domestic assault is a state misdemeanor. Fourth degree.
Correct.
Okay. And that the benefit to this then would be that we be a violation of this ordinance would be considered as a prior under the state statute, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it could be.
Could be. Okay.
Yes.
My question then follows. So for sexual assault, I'm assuming I know that there is a separate statute for that. Does this provide any similar benefit here?
I am not aware of a crime that's called sexual assault. There are various sexual crimes.
Okay.
You may recall that, and you may know that in 2017, the Missouri State Legislature did a very comprehensive revision to the criminal code, and they renamed a number of things and replaced a number of things and put them in different places. But I do not, and Captain Mundell can correct me if I'm wrong, because I may very well be, because I started looking at it when I got the email today. I'm not aware of a crime that is called sexual assault anymore. Now, there is a civil context of sexual assault in domestic relations for purposes of obtaining orders of restraining orders.
Protection.
Correct. And then violations of those orders would be criminal, but not something that we would necessarily be involved in.
Captain, I put the same question to you. Maybe the terms are incorrect, sexual assault, perhaps.
Yeah, the crime itself is defined in statute. In general, you refer to it as a sex crime, but then there's specific, crimes spelled out in the statute, based on the age of the victim, age of suspects, things like that.
And I'm sorry, but my recollection is most of those would fall in the category of a felony as well. So we would not have jurisdiction in our municipal court.
Are either of you aware of any such provision in state law or even county ordinance regarding what's defined here as domestic harassment?
The county does have an ordinance for that, but it could not be applied at the municipal level for Wildwood. That's generally in an unincorporated area of the county. Those ordinances apply to cases we submit to the county municipal court happening in the unincorporated area, where in the city of Wildwood, the city municipal ordinances is what we rely on.
It's what you enforce.
Right.
Okay.
I would note, the county does have an ordinance, and could we model after the county's ordinance? Yes, we could. But that is one of those situations where there is no statutory, corresponding statute for domestic harassment. So it's that's one of those situations where the elements of the crime are exactly the same as general harassment. So the elements that the prosecutor would have to prove up would be exactly the same. The penalties, if approved in the municipality, would be exactly the same. The only difference would be having to prove up the defendant, their status as a someone of a domestic relation. And again, St. Louis County being a county, they are different than a city. A city enforces ordinance violations. I mean, that's actually what they're called, is ordinance violations. They're quasi-criminal. The county, like St. Louis County, has the authority through their ordinances to prosecute misdemeanor violations, which carry also a greater level of penalty available.
I think that was part of when we talked, that there's a certain ceiling at the municipal level that you can't go beyond what statute allows.
Correct.
The municipal court to have authority over.
Correct. And that is the $1,000, 90 days.
And that actually was my next question, is whether either of you would be aware that any of the provisions here would be in conflict with the state law or county ordinance.
I'm not aware of any conflict. Obviously, the penalty provisions couldn't exceed what the penalties are allowed, but I'm not aware of a conflict. And again, I'm not opposed to having specifically identifiable ordinances. I just want to make sure everybody knows what the distinction is. Just as one other note is, if you had domestic harassment and harassment, you could not prosecute both at the same time. Just to throw that out there as well. You have to pick one or the other against a single defendant on a single event.
But again, for purposes here, the difference between harassment and domestic harassment is the definition of the victim, as you said earlier.
That is correct.
Any other questions, please?
Captain Mundell, would the passing of this ordinance change in any way the ability of your force to enforce the existing laws of the state of Missouri in terms of domestic violence?
No, it really depends on the seriousness of what's occurred. And it's usually pretty obvious one way or another. If it, relates to injury, things of that sort, a serious injury is almost obviously going to be a felony. It's going to be pursued at the state level. It's where there's dispute of what occurred, or the evidence is not as strong. Those are the type of cases we refer to the municipal level. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, somewhat. If your officer responds to a call, and they, in their estimation, there has been a violent act, domestic violent act, okay, and they arrest the person for that offense, do they have to designate whether they're arresting them under a state statute or under a county or a ordinance?
Yes. So when they take them in for booking, you have to specify what charge you're applying. If it's a minor situation, we can generally write a summons. If it's a violent act, as you said, I'd expect that there'd be some serious type of injury. That evidence is there, it's visible, we're going to photograph it, that type of stuff, and then we're going to present that case to the state prosecuting attorney and pursue the more serious charge. And that's what we're going to look at pretty much in any incident. What's the maximum law that applies to that?
Okay.
And it usually has to do with injury or the facts of the case.
So would this passing of this ordinance give your officers another layer sort of below injury, below assault, that they could apply that in these domestic situations?
I think yes, as Mr. Young explained, that potential down the road, if it's a pattern of conduct and there's a conviction at this level, it could be beneficial, to escalating prosecution later down the road. But as far as the other specific crimes, such as harassment or stalking, that type of thing, it doesn't appear that there's a benefit there other than spelling out that this is what's happened in this situation. Could the law change down the road to include those? I don't know that.
Okay.
I don't see a problem with doing it, and I don't see a problem by not doing it.
Okay.
So there's still ability to prosecute under current city ordinances.
Okay. Scott, one last question. Back to John. Are you more comfortable, John, if we do not put any penalty in the law, because we have a maximum penalty for ordinances anyway, that we really don't want to get in the mesh of exceeding that by trying to put a different penalty in here?
I wouldn't put a different penalty that's in excess of the cap, but in terms of either reiterating the existing penalty or providing a minimum penalty, I have no objection to that.
And does that have to be written into this ordinance, or is that just understood that if you violate the ordinance, here's the maximum that the city can impose in terms of punishment?
The city code provides for a general penalty, and the way it's worded is, except as otherwise stated in this city code, any ordinance that carries with it a potential penalty the penalty shall be this. So the general penalty provision applies to this and does not need to be restated.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just refresh my memory about what the general penalty provision is?
It is $1,000 or 90 days in jail.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, Scott. John, one more comment. Did I hear you say earlier that if we were to impose a more severe penalty than that cap, and then maybe we legally can't, but if we had, you said something about we'd have to provide legal counsel to the individual?
No, that is only in the case when you put jail time on the table. So if a person is brought in for prosecution and the prosecuting attorney asks for a commitment into the county jail for a period of 30 days, 15 days, whatever the case may be, they are entitled, constitutionally entitled, to have an attorney represent them. And if they do not have their own attorney, the court has to provide an attorney for them.
Okay. So that's on the books today, as it were. Anybody that comes in, violates an ordinance, if the prosecutor says they want this person in jail for 30 days, even at municipal level, we have to provide them with an attorney.
Correct. That's on the books now
okay.
for any ordinance violation. Correct.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, when I say on the books, it's not in our code. It's constitutional requirement.
But the general penalty provision that you had referred to before does include potential jail time and/or.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, so we already have that. Yeah, please.
Deborah's other comment was about stalking, and from the verbiage here, is that really? Can we enforce that? I mean, how would we ever enforce that?
Usually, they get to be pretty serious with stalking. Obviously, they can turn violent. I think we'd be looking at pursuing state charges, as opposed to a municipal charge. You know, it really depends on the facts of the case. That if we're looking at a stalking situation, I would think that state statute would apply, and we want to pursue that because the penalties would be greater.
Right. What does your office do if someone comes in and says, my domestic partner is stalking me. We separated 4 months ago, and he or she won't leave me alone. Yada yada yada. What do you do in those cases?
Usually, it's escalating. There may be an order of protection in place, which creates other avenues for that prosecution. We're looking for a pattern of conduct. Can we prove a pattern of conduct? Phone calls, messages, showing up at work, are there witnesses to that? It goes in all different directions. And if we can substantiate that, then I think it's going to fall, under the state prosecution, which again, that's what we want to go with. So,
in your opinion, even though it's well intended, adding stalking in ours wouldn't make any difference in how you would enforce it if someone came forward and said, "I think I have a stalking issue. What can you do about it?"
I don't believe so. I guess I'd defer back to Mr. Young and see if his thoughts on it, but most likely not.
While the city does not currently have a stalking ordinance, my recollection is we're going through the recodification and we're about to complete that, and my recollection is that it's been added in that. I'll double check that though, but my recollection is stalking has been added. Now, stalking is a Class A misdemeanor under state law, and there's 2 degrees, first degree and second degree. Second degree is a Class A misdemeanor, which carries with it penalties, maximum penalties that are in excess of what the city's maximum penalties are. And there's also potential felony applications if it's, against a police officer or the family of a police officer or law enforcement officer. So I believe we're adding stalking generally. And again, the question is if adding domestic to that would add anything to it. It wouldn't change the penalty, and it wouldn't trigger any state penalties either. Mr. Chairman, one thing I may suggest, just kind of going forward, because I know this is a lot to put on you all for one night, is perhaps, after the discussion tonight, and for the next meeting, we can prepare a chart that compares side by side what the county ordinances are, what city code provisions we have, and what state law provides, just so you can see it all side by side to kind of put things in perspective.
I think that sounds like a very good idea, actually. And actually, I was going to ask a question of you, so please come to the microphone.
I understand that the county has a law and that the state has a law. And we have had a lot of discussion back and forth, and, you know, the wording is similar but different. And the reason I think the penalty portion is the most important, and the reason is because I think that sends a strong message that the city of Wildwood strongly objects to domestic violence. I think it gives a little bit more secure feeling to those who experience domestic violence, the fact that there is a penalty stated within the ordinance. So I realize the county and the state has a penalty, and theirs can be greater as it goes up the line. But I think it's important also because it sets a pattern, like Captain Mundell just said, and it establishes that pattern. So then when they get to county, they're more likely to be prosecuted rather than just dismissed. So I think, having a charge is great, but I would strongly suggest that we put some sort of penalty in the ordinance.
By and large, I agree with your sentiment in general. I think it'd be important to match the language. Depending on where we head with this, I was going to suggest instead of being just or, be and/or to mimic the general penalty provision. Already said there's no problem with restating the same penalty into this particular ordinance, should that be what the county council decides to do. So I'm quite sympathetic to that argument. I am curious. I did have a question about the stalking, the definition. Did you see the definition stated here from your text? Was that found at, did you find that in another ordinance?
Found that in the county.
In the county? Okay. It just seemed rather general, so I was just curious what there might be in there. Okay.
I have a copy of it if you'd like.
Do you?
Yes.
That would be helpful for review.
I've got the county.
Okay, thank you.
You have any other questions of me?
Any other questions? Deborah's here. I don't, thank you.
Mr. Marshall, I'd like to move that we table this until the next meeting in which we can have the chart drawn up by Attorney Young so we can assess the side-by-side ordinances and then make a ruling on this at that time.
There's a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? I would also suggest that should the motion pass, that we share the two ordinances that have been shared with us so that we can digest them all at the same time and be prepared at the next meeting to move forward with this. Any other concerns or no?
Yeah, just my intent in terms of preparing the chart is you will see side by side
Right.
the city code provisions that either exist now or will be when the recodification comes through, the statute, and the comparable St. Louis County ordinance.
Okay. I think that'd be very helpful. So, please.
Could we get this information a week or two ahead of the next meeting, as opposed to a day or two, just so we have time to? It's a pretty complicated issue that at least I find it a pretty complicated issue. It'd be good to have it as soon as possible.
I will absolutely do that.
Thanks.
We'll be sure we get it to you at least a week in advance. That's okay.
Very good. Thank you for that. I know. Any other questions or comments? Motion on the floor is to table to the next meeting, provide us more time to review and gather other information and await the presentation from the city attorney. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Ms. McCutcheon, thank you very much for coming and also for presenting this to us. This is a very important matter, and something I think we need to, take our time to review so we come to the best outcome for the residents of Wildwood. Next item on the agenda, the Deer Management Plan review of the survey. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. After some time, we have some results, and I provided those to you of the deer survey. I want to at least publicly acknowledge Sarah, who has helped us with the preparation. She did a great job, and hopefully Captain Monday will pass that along. Putting it together and tabulating results, she put them in a nice PowerPoint for us as well. So I was hoping she would be here tonight, but she said she was feeling a little bit ill and under the weather, so that's fine, no problem, but we do certainly appreciate all the work she's done. So I wanted to go through the survey results and go through each question individually, if that's okay with the board. And then if you have any specific questions that you'd like answers to, we can certainly do our best to get those to you. I'm gonna mention that. So we did, as we tabulated, you'll notice as you go through the results, they are broken out in most cases by ward. So Michelle had recommended, and I do have a copy of the ward map, and I think you have a hard copy in front of you as well. So most of you may not be so familiar with the ward boundaries, so it might be helpful in some cases to refer to that map, and you can tell, and there's some interesting information that you kind of glean from the results looking at the different wards. So keep that in mind if you don't mind. And if you want me to put the ward map up, I can do that real fast on the overhead, if that helps. So first question, just simply ask folks to tell us what ward they live in. So we do have a breakdown on that. Don't know there's too much to say about that. The number one response was Ward 4. They get the prize for putting in the most responses. Followed by Ward 6. So at any rate, that's the information there. I'm going to move forward to question 2, if that's okay. So question 2, reference the size of your property. Kind of interesting in my mind. Most of the response is almost 62% less than 1 acre. So a lot of the folks that responded to it are at least what I would call are more traditional subdivisions, smaller lots, not folks on 3 acres necessarily. We did have those as well. The second highest was 3 to 4 acres, almost 20% responding. So kind of an interesting result there as well. Question 3, how long have you lived in Wildwood? Basically, most respondents were over 10 years, so maybe that would be to be expected. People don't move all that frequently, so maybe that makes a lot of sense. Incidentally, I didn't start off by mentioning the total number of respondents were, and you obviously can see that right there, 949 total responses to the survey. And we did have a handful of non-resident responses that we took out. I believe Sarah said there was about nine people that stated they were not in Wildwood, so that was not included in these numbers. So moving forward to question 4. Within Wildwood city limits, do you believe the deer population is just right, too high, or too low? And looking at the totals for all wards, I mean, quite clearly, there's a pretty a very high majority of folks saying it's too high, almost 73% citywide. It does vary. It's kind of interesting. Ward 4 is very high in the too high response as well, almost 82% in Ward 4 for whatever reason that is. But those saying it's just right, about 24%. Those saying it's too low, less than 1%. So it seems to be some good information there. Incidentally, the Ward 6 was the ward that had the highest percentage of survey respondents who felt the deer population was just right. And we usually look at Wards 1 and Ward 6 as being the more rural wards with larger lots, more predominantly 3-acre homes on those properties within those two wards, generally speaking. Going on to question 5. In an average week within Wildwood city limits, how many deer do you see in the following spaces? So this first graphic is just showing you the 3 different locations on your property in green spaces or within proximity of the roadway. And then the following slides are a similar breakdown of that same data, I believe. A lot of numbers to look at on the next slide. But I think the takeaway here is most people are definitely seeing deer on an every week basis, either on their property or adjacent to the road or in public spaces. I think I went through and added up the responses, and almost 64% are saying they've seen more than 6 deer in their response. So it's a strong majority are seeing more than 6 deer in those locations. This is the same question relative to just within proximity of the roadway as well. Any questions about question 5 at all? It's a lot of information there. Question 6. Have you experienced damage to your lawn landscaping from deer in the past 3 years? Yes or no? More than 76% overall said yes to that question. 22.3% responded no, and 1.3% skipped the question altogether. So most people have experienced some damage to their lawn or landscaping. So the next question pertains to the cost. Question 7. So we've provided categories $0 to $100, $101 to $500, $501 to $1,000, and $1,000 plus. So of those responding, around 40%, that's not very timely, is it? I'm going to have to wait a few seconds. Bear with. All right. I think we're back in business. Again, I apologize. So we were going over question 7. Around 40% of the respondents experienced between $101 and $500 worth of damage. 27% had low damage overall. And then if you really want to dive into the numbers per ward on question 7, that's the numbers that we received as well. We did have a lot of folks on this question who, for whatever reason, did not provide a number, did not answer it. So it's hard to understand if they were indicating they just didn't know, because it's obviously a difficult thing to probably estimate. Most people have a little difficulty saying, so wanted to point that out as well. The 24.3% folks that responded did not address that one. They left it blank, basically. Moving on to question 8, unless there's questions of the board. In the past 5 years within Wildwood city limits, have you or a member of your household been involved in a motor vehicle accident or collision involving a deer in the roadway? Of this question overall, 27% answered yes, and 71% answered no, so I guess that's a good thing. The next slide shows the response relative to the amount of damage that was estimated by the responder. So question 9, most responders reported that they did have some costs associated with their crashes. 7% reported no cost. 24% reported over $5,000 of damages, I believe. And this is similar information relative to that question. The question was, please estimate the cost of damage to your vehicle and or hospital bills from the previously mentioned accident or accidents involving deer in the roadway. Any questions for anybody?
Quite a few people didn't answer that question.
Beg your pardon?
Quite a few people didn't bother to answer. Question 9. 73%.
Yeah, this is true. That's a good point.
Seems odd.
Yeah.
I've hit a deer before and had no damage, so and the deer ran off, so that does happen. So it's possible that might be what occurred.
Right. It was just a curiosity, but we did have a 0 calculation for that as well. So, but anyways.
Yep. Moving on to question 10. While living in Wildwood, have you or anyone in your household been treated for a tick-borne illness? And the question was either yes or no. We had 11% of the folks responding saying yes to that. A little over 87% saying no. And Sarah did make the comment to us that it's difficult to know if that 11%, what that means. We don't know if that's really high or low. We can't compare it to anything else. Probably would require a little more research to really give it a lot of significance, because we don't know if that's high for our Wildwood, for our population, or low. Yeah. Question 11, do you support Wildwood adopting a no-feeding ordinance? And this was very strong in favor of adopting an ordinance. 81.2% said yes, 16.4% said no. So that was pretty interesting, and seems to show very strong support for such an ordinance. Moving on to question 12. Would you be in favor of allowing adjacent property owners to combine their lots in order to meet the minimum 3-acre minimum, which would allow hunting subject to city or homeowners association approval? So, again, overall, those answering yes were 58.4%, no 38.5%. And there was 3.2 that did not respond to that question. So some support there. A majority are responding favorable, but not nearly as much support as we saw with the feeding ban ordinance, obviously. And I think this is going to do it. Question 13. Are you in favor of the City of Walwood adopting a sharpshooter program or a trap and euthanize program to periodically manage the number of deer in Wildwood? So, when you look at the response to this question, we did have 46.8 that showed support for either the sharpshooter program or the trap and euthanize. 25.9% did not support either program, and then 3.6 skipped the question altogether. So, interesting response. Definitely support for either program. It's not more than a majority there necessarily either. It's less than 50%. So, it's an interesting response for sure. So, with that, are there any questions of the board members for question 13, or any of the questions, any of the responses in the deer survey that you'd like to go over in more detail?
Rick, what's your gut feel here? Everything was cruising along there, and then less than half of the respondents said they did not want to shoot or euthanize deer. Was that a surprise, you think?
Well, on one hand, it was, I don't know if I had an expectation one way or the other, frankly. I don't know that I would have a good feel for it either, but so I wouldn't say it was a surprise. I think the numbers are what the numbers are. It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, clearly there's support. I don't know if it's when you look, I guess we didn't talk too much about the comments that we got. I think Michelle put them together and provided a copy.
Yeah, because when you combine if you look at people who indicated sharpshooter only, trap and euthanize only, and then the people who supported either, you're around 69%. If I'm missing that, unless I'm framing it wrong.
Oh, so some people, all right, there was an option to say either, so that if I responded either program, I'm 46% of those responded, and that was their only response. I was reading it wrong. I was reading it as sharpshooter program. Some of those who said either, I'm confusing myself, but I see what you're saying. If I said sharpshooter program, yes, that's what they wanted. But then you said, okay, that one plus the trap and euthanize gives you either program.
Mm-hmm.
I got you. Okay.
So,
sorry about that.
And if you add that up, it's 569 are basically in favor of some sort of management like that, and then 246 are in favor of neither. So, and there's a bunch of people that didn't respond to that of the 958. So 200, we're almost missing.
Or roughly 70%.
Yeah, we're missing like
favored some action.
Like 143 skipped it. Is that right?
It says
like 34.
34 skipped
34,
it altogether.
so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think something there. So.
Well, if I can make an observation, it seems like, if I'm reading this right, we had 949 responses out of our entire Wildwood residential population. So it seems like the people that are really struggling with the deer are those that responded, or those that are really passionate about the wildlife here responded, and then everyone else maybe, what can we assume by the non-responders? They just don't care one way or another, or?
Yeah, I guess your question is relative to this specific response, or just in?
Just in general,
General.
overall, starting from general and then moving to specific.
Well, I guess we had decided that, it's almost 10%. It's a pretty good sample. The hope is that you have a cross section of what people really think. But in truth, with surveys, people are drawn because they have a reason. So I don't know. I think that's a question we kind of can't answer, but we can just make.
And that's fair.
We can make assumptions.
Right, that's fair.
So did you provide the comments to the?
Yeah, can I say something about the way that I sort of put these together? So just so they
Sure. Michelle has spent a decent amount of time trying to capture the comments that came with the responses, and she provided that information to you. So we were trying to figure out the best way to try to capture that information and make it more readable. So.
Sure. And I was just curious if either of you, since you've had a chance to see some of these, particularly Michelle, if you had any observations in general about the comments.
Well, my first thing is that there's only 358 comments of the 958 responses. So 500 people did not make comments. So I just want to, I think the importance of the data that we have in the non-comment data really stands still. The way I laid it out was basically in categories, and these categories sort of came to me as I was finding chunks of information. So they weren't predetermined in any way. They were what was there. So what also I decided to do was that I decided to shade in orange anywhere that was a specific location, just because I thought anyone on council or law enforcement might, that might be good information. I just figured it was, it did have some extra importance. I had started to kind of color code things as there were some solution-based things in here, and then I realized, well, I don't know if I'm the person to really determine that. So, but I think that people, there's, definitely a certain number of emotional responses, but I think there's a lot of intelligent, solution-based responses, and there's some, I felt like in reading these, what it really helped me see was that, these responses are all over the map, and I don't think that's just an emotional thing. I think we have very bisected community as far as what's west of 109 and what is east of 109. We do currently have two different, sets of rules for those areas, and it probably in some ways for certain rules to be made, you are addressing two very different locations, and possibly very different mindsets as far as how people experience the overpopulation of deer. But I left them all in there. I didn't take any out, so just know that. And I did put the number of how many in each category. One thing that might be valuable that I think Sarah would probably be able to pull from the survey easily is a set of comments by ward. And I think location-wise, that might be easier for council, and it might be easier as far as if you were deciding to do two sets of rules for both sides of town. That's pretty much all I have about that.
Any other questions? Rick or Michelle? Comments?
I think certainly we're looking for direction from the board in terms of moving forward. The way we've structured the year was the deer subcommittee would be meeting in alternate months with the full board. So presumably next month we would meet again as a subcommittee, potentially utilize this information moving forward if that's the desire of the board to do such. But I think any feedback would be appreciated in terms of what's the expectation. But I think this is certainly showing a lot of support for moving forward. And the comments, when you read the comments, that's the one thing I glean out of it is there's a lot of folks who do want to see something done. I think that's pretty clear to me that folks do want to see something done. It's not so easy to determine exactly what that is, but they do want to see the city take some action and encourage management of the population.
Right.
If I could say one more thing, I remembered. Then if you look in the hunting section of the comments, it's just hunting comments, so pro and for. What I noticed in a lot of the comments have multiple items in them, so I kind of just took the strongest statement and put it in that category. But what I noticed a lot, there were a lot of hunters that said, don't spend a dime on these management programs, get, increase archery hunting, increase season, and, get hunters to do the work. So I thought that was interesting. So you'll see some of that.
Okay, very good. And so the gentleman in the back is indicate. You know what? It's a public meeting. Come on up.
Perfect segue, by the way. Hi, Rick. I am Tim Donzie. I'm in Ward 1. I have been in Wildwood for 2 years now. I moved here because of the wildlife. It's beautiful here. I reflect very much what the entire survey represents, in my opinions. My interest is in what was just said, the concept that we not only address things with opportunities for sharpshooters or trapping, but really promote what's free, hunting, archery hunting, whatever it may be. I really like the rules east and west of 109. Obviously, I'm west of 109. I'm on 3 acres. Harvested my first deer this year in my yard. It was awesome. Sharpshooters is going to cost money, obviously. I do want the population under control. It's very obvious it is out of control. Can hunters solve the problem alone? I don't know. Are there possible ways to increase the harvest by hunting? I believe so completely. Is there a combination of the two that might work? Maybe. I was initially not interested whatsoever in the concept of sharpshooting until I read that it would include all of that meat going to share the harvest. I just don't want the meat going to waste. Seeing the meat laying on the side of Highway 100 hurts me. I love deer. I love wildlife. I love hunting them. I like eating them. More than anything, I like watching them. I like watching them in my yard, but there's still too many. I agree. But when I took the survey, I was partially offended by what I perceived as a lean towards a negative perspective on our deer population and negative commentary upon deer and the value of them in our community. I think they're very valuable. We have to manage them, correct. But in the survey, there was not a whole lot about hunting. There was not a whole lot about other methods than sharpshooting and maybe trapping and euthanization. So I would encourage the city to be balanced in their communications to the citizens. I did not think the survey was. I don't know if that tainted any of the responses per se. Might have made some people more passionate, be angry about things. I was. Rick saw some of my emails, I'm sure. He was copied on many. We corresponded. I tried to reach out. I am interested in being involved from the hunting perspective. If we can coordinate more connections between landowners that don't hunt and hunters that are safe and responsible, I would volunteer to help that, facilitate that. I can surely help from the hunter perspective. I maybe can help on the technology side of trying to connect landowners to the hunters. I don't know if that's something that we want to do or not. I've researched a little. There is, I think it's in Virginia, they have an application for just that kind of a thing to connect the two. If you're a landowner and you're interested in somebody to come help stop the deer from eating all of your garden or your little crop or whatever it might be, put your name in. If you're a hunter, put your name in. Have some requirements. Managed hunts from Conservation Department, a lot of times you have to go and have a meeting and sit down. Maybe there's a proficiency test on shooting your bow. Maybe there's rules on elevated platforms, tree stands versus on the ground. There's all kinds of things to consider. Extending the hunting season. I think there are things that could be done in conjunction with the Conservation Department. I presume it would take being in conjunction with the Conservation Department to extend the hunting season. It's so much better than having people's... we were driving down 100 just last week. Car in front of us, didn't see the deer, plowed it, flew in the air, parts everywhere, horrible. It's happened to us, not in the Wildwood. It's happened to us in rural Missouri. So I want the public in Wildwood to know that hunting is a very viable option, and I would like us to pursue that as heavily as all the other solutions, such as sharpshooting and trapping. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, again, this is a lot to absorb. I think, Rick, your suggestion is a good one, that we get the subcommittee back together next month. We go over this, see what we can come up with.
I think that would give some time, too, to read the comments potentially, and maybe have some opportunity to digest those a little bit before that meeting potentially. And I don't know, Michelle, we were going to send it to Aaron Shank. I don't know if we've done that or not, but certainly we were going to make sure Aaron Shank had a copy of the results and reach out to her potentially to come visit with us again.
Sure.
At some point.
Good idea.
In the meantime, is there anything else you want to know that we can research, or anything we can do with this data that would make it more handy for you all?
No, I think the biggest thing is going to be going through the comments, where which really, that's going to give you the feel for where their minds are at regarding options. If you want, I can also see if Sarah can deliver the comments by ward as well, if that helps. So they're in a context by location. Right, I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, I'll just make a couple of comments if I may. So I think it's really going to be important that we set expectations with the community about this. No matter what decisions are made or what management program we put in place, it's going to take a long time, and I do believe that nature will respond. And, you know, in what way, I'm not sure. But whatever we do with the deer, nature will respond. Deer are a part of our ecosystem that's complex. We don't always understand all the impacts of trying to solve a single species problem. And I would just keep that in mind as the subcommittee continues to have discussions and make recommendations. The other thing that's really on my mind that's probably of greatest importance is I want to remind this group that we did have children present to us from the middle schools, and they are paying attention to what we're doing. And I think it's just really important that we're mindful of what message we want to send to the children in Wildwood. And also, whatever we do, if we could just consider, you know, the safety of children.
Thank you for that. Comments or questions regarding this matter before we move on? Okay. I see that was the last item of business for the evening. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Actually, the Captain, we have something for other, so please, Captain.
Certainly, it's been brought up over the past year. There was some requests, just kind of data over our 911 communication center and our call answering ability by our 911 dispatchers. So I got a year-end report to follow up on that. They asked for periodic updates, so I'm just throw this update out there. In general, there are 19 locations throughout the county that answer 911 calls. St. Louis County answers 47% of those calls out of all those 19. Our average 911 call pickup time is 4.3 seconds, which is down from 4.4 seconds in 2018. Industry standard that a call is answered within 10 seconds is at 90%. St. Louis County's is at 89.19%, so we're right about at that average. So again, this is just some quick hard numbers, just to keep the board informed of that and the public as well. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other items for discussion that weren't on the agenda? Concerns, questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Of course not. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.